You ever catch yourself looking at a classic BMW thinking, man, I need that? Maybe it's that compact design of an E30 or those slick lines of an E46 parked in a lot. Or maybe you even saw that E28 5 Series in a Mission Impossible movie and thought, man, that's the one. Listen, I've been there. The dream became my reality, and owning a classic BMW is an experience like no other. I mean, I've started a freaking YouTube channel because of these cars. Look, they're not just machines, they're time capsules, great engineering wrapped in a whole lot of style. But as you may already know, it's not all fun and games. Behind those iconic kidney grills and those sleek body lines lies a world full of, let's say, incredible rewards and some character building moments. There's quirks, costs, and a few challenges you need to know before you decide to get one of these. So in this video I'll give you the real deal of owning a classic BMW. Just some straight up facts from someone who's been driving, fixing, and sometimes even yelling at these cars. In this video I'm gonna be talking about what I like to call the golden era of BMWs. 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. You know, all the classics: E24, E28, E30, E31, E32, E34, E36, E39, and finally E46. You know, these are the cars that put BMW on the map as the ultimate driving machine. I'll break it all down to you. Which model fits best to your driving style, which engines you should go for and which ones you should avoid, where rust likes to hide, and how much is it gonna cost you to keep one on the road. And a few things you might not expect when owning one of these BMWs. So, if we break it down real quick, you have the 3 Series, which for this era consists of E21, E30, E36, and E46. And that's a nice looking BMW. A 3 Series is for people who love driving. Light, fun, and connected to the road. No unnecessary tech, just a car that makes every drive feel special. Then you have the 5 Series, E12, E28, E34, and E39. Think of the 5 Series as a bigger, more comfortable 3 Series. They're really great on long drives, really comfortable, but still fun on twisty roads. If you want a classic that's both practical and enjoyable, I think that's your car. And then you have the E24 6 Series, which is basically a 5 Series, but for those who would like to feel like pimps. It's a cool Grand Touring coupe, and for me, it's the best looking BMW of all time. It sits up there right next to the E9. And also it has just the right mix of luxury and fun. And then you have the E23, E32, and E38 7 Series. And it's all about old school luxury. It's not a sports car by any means. No, these cars are really for those who would like to feel what it was like to be rich back in the day. And of course we can't forget about the E31 8 Series. It's a sleek high-end coupe with pop-up headlights, and this one is really for people who seek something rare and special. Let's talk engines. Everybody knows BMW for their legendary silky smooth straight 6. But there's actually a bunch of awesome 4-cylinders too, which are great if you're a beginner. And there are V8s and V12s too, but I would stay away from these engines if you're just getting started with classic BMWs. So here's why the 4-cylinders are great for a beginner. You have tons of room in the engine bay to work on them. You can access pretty much anything and they're super simple. And those early M10s, they're indestructible. Like you couldn't kill those engines if you tried. You're looking at a picture of the day I drove my E30 home after buying it. Do you see the water temp gauge? Yup, I didn't even realize it until 2 days later. Car literally had no water in the radiator. And also, when I checked the oil level, there was none showing on the dipstick. I mean, it was crazy. And I drove like that for 2 days. And I don't even want to know how long the previous owner drove around like that. So yeah, if you ask me, pretty indestructible. So anyway, let's get back. Then you had the M40 and the M43 engines. Those were the evolution of the M10 and were tiny little economic 4-cylinder engines that honestly are pretty boring, didn't make much torque or horsepower. But BMW also had those spin-off versions of these engines called M42 and M44. And you can find these engines in cars like E30 318IS, E36 318IS, and the Z3 1.9. They're super good on fuel consumption at low RPMs, but in the higher RPM they become these race engines, which feel super responsive and they pull actually really good. But here's the thing about 4-cylinder BMWs. Once you drive a 6-cylinder, it's really hard to go back. I mean, almost impossible. The 4-cylinders just don't have that torque, and you really feel it. Yeah, they can be fun and light and tossable, but once you drive a 6-cylinder, it's over. The 6-cylinder is really where you get that classic BMW feel. There's 2 models of early 6-cylinder engines, M20 and M30. The M20s are sort of like small displacement engines, and M30s are big boys. The M30s really feel like airplane engines, and that, you know, makes sense because BMW started out with making airplane engines, and later on they sort of mixed these two engines together and created the M50, which evolved in the M52 and M54, and each one just got better. But these newer models came with a lot of plastic parts around the engine, especially the cooling system parts, which tend to dry up and break, so you gotta watch out for that. But the early engines weren't perfect either. They had like million vacuum lines all over the place, and because they're so old, they developed cracks, and these can really give you headaches, so I would just replace all of them. Plus, with the early engines you have to adjust the valves yourself, and with the newer ones they're self-adjusting. So let's talk about what to watch out for in these engines. With 4 cylinders, I would listen for ticking noises. Pretty much every 4-cylinder BMW from this era ticks like crazy now. But still, if you're buying one, I would go for the one that ticks the less, obviously. And in the later 6-cylinder models, watch out for Vanos and Disa sounds. And Disa can sometimes start making ticking noises, and if it does that, it's not the end of the world, but you should definitely replace it. If you leave it ticking for too long, it can actually end up exploding, and you don't want that happening. And like I said before, if you don't want any headaches, just replace all your cooling components and vacuum lines. Trust me, you really don't want to be dealing with some weird idle issue or power loss due to some vacuum line being disintegrated. And oh yeah, this goes for pretty much all BMW engines in this era. So, electronics. Surprisingly, BMWs from this era are pretty reliable in terms of electronics. I never had any problems, not in this car, not in my E30. Okay, maybe I had some gauge cluster issues. But that's just because these cars are getting really old right now, and connections behind the gauge cluster can sometimes start corroding. And I also had some grounding issues with my E30, so I chased that around for a couple of weeks, but then I found the problem and it was okay. So typically in a 3 or 5 series, there's not much electronically that can go wrong. These problems exist more in like a 7 or 8 series because there's just more stuff to break. So just test like every button, every window switch, every center console switch. Just check everything, and if it all works, it's probably gonna continue working. Yes, stuff can break, but also this is what I like about BMWs. Their community is so large, and you can still buy almost every part directly from BMW for a relatively cheap price. And if you can't find it, or if it's really expensive, then I'm pretty sure some guy in your local area has it laying around somewhere in their backyard. You gotta remember, these cars were mass-produced cars. For example, over 2 million of E30s were produced. This is huge. Now, for the not-so-great part, rust. These cars rust like crazy. This is probably the biggest headache you're gonna have. Think about it, these cars were daily drivers in the 80s and 90s, and for a long time these cars were worth nothing. People bought them as second cars or winter beaters and really abused them, and nowadays clean ones are getting really hard to find. But you can still find some. So if you're planning to go check out a car, I would look for rust in your typical BMW areas. I would definitely recommend checking out the rear wheel arches, jack points, the battery tray area either front or in the rear, of course the floor, and this area below the windshield on the outside. These spots like to collect water and then they tend to rust, so definitely check those before buying. Oh yeah, and watch out for body filler as well. And here's something funny, pretty much all these old BMWs were crashed at some point. Not any major damage, but they were definitely in an accident before. They are BMWs at the end of the day, and people drove them like crazy. Both my E30 and my E46 were crashed at one point. Not a lot, but both have some front-end damage that was obviously repaired. And now that I think about it, I don't even know if I've seen an old BMW that wasn't crashed at one point. Sure, they exist, but likely the ones you're looking at was probably crashed at some point. If it wasn't, then the owner is probably lying. Nah, I'm just kidding, but even if it had some damage before, don't stress out, it's that's just how it is. So for the suspension, there's really not much to say, but please replace all the bushings you can. These are old cars, and pretty much all the bushings are probably dried out by now. so make sure you stay on top of that. So here's a little fun tip. Try to get a car that was driven regularly. You know, these cars don't like to sit. If you end up buying some kind of a barn find or a garage queen that was just sitting there all the time looking pretty, as soon as you're gonna start driving that car, things will start breaking. Plus, a car that was used a lot also means that it was maintained a lot. And that means you're likely not gonna have that seized bolts problem. You know, in my E30, I never found one seized or rusted bolt. And that's because it was driven and serviced over all these years. If you have a car with seized and rusted bolts, then a 15-minute job turns into a week-long pain and suffering. Because you need professional help. You can't do this alone, really, because you have to drill them out, clean it, and put new threads in. And yeah, you know, it's just something to think about. So let's talk money. This is kind of tricky, you know. Most people buy the cheapest one they can for the first BMW, and they think, okay, I'll buy this one for 3K and then I'll have something left for maintenance. And that kind of makes sense if you know what you're getting into, but that car can quickly turn into a money pit. You know, you might end up spending like 10K just to make it drivable. Okay, I over-exaggerated a little bit here, but you know what I mean. So now a quick reality check. Expect to spend at least 1,000 to 3,000 euros or dollars in the first year of ownership. And it doesn't really matter which model you get, and that's just maintenance. You know, when I first bought this E46, I spent about 1,600 euros in the first month of ownership. I had to replace the AC compressor, front control arms, some bushings, you know, some buttons in the interior, like this window switch, for example. But after that, I was pretty much cool. Like from October of 2023, I haven't put a single cent into this car, and it still works great. It's reliable. So just make sure to fix all the necessary things in the first couple of months of ownership, and I think you'll be good. You know, the older you go for, the more stuff will probably break, but that's just how it is, you know. Just remember to always keep like $1,000 on the side for any unexpected fixes. So let me tell you a story. My first BMW and my first car was my E30 316 with a 1.6 carbureted 75 horsepower engine. The E30 is my favorite BMW. I don't know what it is. It's not the best looking one, but it just has this, I don't know, it all just clicks together. So I got the most basic model there was for an E30. The engine didn't really matter to me because I knew I was gonna swap it later, and I actually did. I swapped it to a 1.8 M42 engine from BMW E46 318 IS. The car almost had no options. Well, it had no options, only a radio. So not much could break, but it was a perfect platform for building a car into something better. But when I think about it, I really spent too much money on it. For that money, I could have bought a really good car from the start. You know, I would definitely do things differently now. For example, like I did with this car. When I bought this one, I went for the best looking one, the most powerful one, and it had all the options that I wanted. And I'm really glad I did it like that, because it's really nice that I don't have to mess around with it like I did with my E30. But you know, at the same time, I do not regret a single euro I spent on my E30, because I would have never have learned how to swap engines, how to work on cars if I hadn't done this. So you know, it's a good and bad, because there's really something about buying a base model BMW and then upgrading it as you go. You know, every option, everything you add feels like an achievement. But if you're just somebody that would like to have an old BMW as a hobby, you know, and you don't really want to become a mechanic, you know, then I would suggest you pick the nicest example you can, spend a little bit more money at the start, and I think you'll be good. But you know, be careful. Once you buy one of these cars, it can really start pulling you in, you know, it's like a rabbit hole. For example, these cars became everything to me. My whole personality started developing around these cars. You know, like I said, I started a freaking YouTube channel just because of these cars. If I would never buy that E30, who knows where I would be right now. I definitely wouldn't be making these videos. So, you know, it's just something to watch out for, because once you start, I don't think there's going back.
Son, you know, once you start, there's no going back. This means total commitment. Once you begin the path, there is no leaving the path. Are you sure you're ready for that? I mean, really ready?
I guess so.
Neat. We'll start tomorrow.
So now you know what you're getting into. You know, it's a good thing and a bad thing. And if you're not ready to change your life like that, don't buy an old BMW, really. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite BMW classic model is. And also, if you have any specific questions about certain BMW models from this era, do not hesitate to ask. Also, you can follow me and DM me on Instagram. I'll be happy to answer every question you have. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out a lot. So yeah, that's it. See you guys in the next video. And these were the engines. Ooh, cool. The early M20s, and I have this douchebag of a lady behind me. What the f, man? Oh, why are you on my ass? And I'm the one in the BMW, and it's 70, and I'm going 80. Come on. So let's talk about what to. So let's talk about what to.